Now you get why. When they'll have another class taught by Mr. Musgrove, well, here you go. Your last class taught by Mr. Musgrove. I don't know why you're so excited about it. Now, the truth is, I've only known this class for a few months, which is shorter than everyone else. So the thought is I stood probably the best chance of getting through a sermon without tearing up, but we will see. I want to take you back an undisclosed amount of years, back to when I was in college. Now, I wasn't in Bible college. I was studying to be an engineer. So I was studying physics and calculus, and for some reason that time, I found the time to read more into God's Word than I ever had before. See, I went to Mississippi State. Mississippi State, geographically at the time, was really far away from a church area. So for the first time in my life, I was away from my parents. I was raised in the church. I was away from any brethren, at first at least. So I had an opportunity to question, what do I actually believe in? See, I don't have to keep the Sabbath. I mean, that could have been what my parents were making me do. I don't have to go to church. I don't have to do all these things that I had been raised to do. But it made me ask some questions. Why was I doing those? And so I read. I read and I read and I read. And I read a really thick book from a guy who had passed away 20 years before. Some parts of it were very boring. But in the midst of that book, there was one sentence that stood out to me. And I would quote it verbatim, but I just would rather share to you how it made me feel. He said that you have a purpose. It's really simple. I feel sure somebody had told me that by the time I made it to my early 20s, but I can't promise that I heard it. This book told me that you had a great purpose, that God had a purpose for you. Now, the book also, in telling you about this purpose, told you that you had a choice. You see, you know who else had a purpose? Satan. Satan, the adversary, once had a purpose. And so we have a choice in this purpose to either follow that purpose, follow God's way of life, or to follow our own way. And so that's where I was in college. I was at this choice between discovering my purpose that God had for me. Now, I did not know what that meant at the time. I was really sure that it did not mean that I was ever going to become a pastor. That was never going to happen. But it did mean I was going to get baptized when I read that. I sought that day for baptismal counseling. And anybody knows how that goes. It was write an essay, see me in a month. But I started that process. I knew that I wanted to be baptized. I knew I wanted to serve God's people the best way that I could. I wanted to edify the church, to build it up, not tear it down. And as naive as it was, I knew that I was in civil engineering. I wanted to study how the world worked, so I got into environmental engineering. I was an environmental engineer for about 15 years. So I thought that in finishing the world, in finishing God's plan, maybe if I learn how the world works, that I could help in some kind of way, because remember, I'm never going to be a pastor. Let's think about this commitment, this purpose, and let's go to Proverbs 16. Just one verse here. Proverbs 16 and verse 3 says, Commit your works to the Lord, and your thoughts will be established. So there's something that we have to do. Even if you're born in the church, you've lived this way of life, it is everything that you've ever known. At some point, God is going to ask you to commit. The word commit here is the Hebrew word galgal, however you might say that. Some of you would probably pronounce it better than a boy from Mississippi. But it means to roll away. It's kind of interesting. It sounds very similar to Golgotha, the place of the skull, where sins were rolled away. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to say roll away your works. But in terms here, it means to roll yourself into God's way. You are committing yourself to the Lord, committing yourself to God. and your thoughts will be established. You'll know that purpose, that desire that I had when I was young, and some of you have now, will be established in what you do. First, you had to make the commitment. You had to make that choice. So this sermon, as you could tell, will be for the graduates, but the rest of us aren't dead, right? we remember those stones we cast in our youth, that commitment that we made, and let's revive those. Let's ignite those fires. So it's not just for them, it's for all of us. It's to remember those commitments. It gives us the opportunity to be reminded of that mindset that we had, like I did when we were younger at the same time. To remember that first love, to renew our goals and motivation, no matter what age we are, no matter where we are in our journey to this purpose that we have. So I'm going to go back to Numbers. Probably ask any of the ABC students where we are going, but we're going to talk a little bit about the Nazarite Vow. It's kind of hard to make a sermon out of the book of Numbers. You got some begats. You got how much the tribute was paid by each tribe of Israel. But we find something interesting in Numbers chapter 6. This is where we learn about the conditions of the Nazarite vow, a vow made to God. So we're going to read some parts of this, but let's talk a little bit about it, summarize it, if you will, and then we'll go through it in great detail. First off, this Nazarite vow, believe it or not, women could take it. It wasn't just for men. Women's vow was a little bit different because a husband or a father could disavow her without any punishment, but women could take the Nazarite vow. It was usually for a set amount of time. Sometimes it was lifelong, but we do see that sometimes it was just dedicated for a set amount of time. Now, why would you take this vow? Well, would you take it because, hey, I'm a weak person, this is my only option that I had, making up for some moral weakness that I may have? Every instance that we see where this Nazarite vow was taken was in Thanksgiving. It was being thankful to God. You dedicated a portion of your life, or maybe the rest of your life, to God because you were thankful. Not because you were sad or hurt or needed somewhere to go, but because you were thankful to God. And the Nazarite comes from the word Nazir, or to separate or keep away from, not to be confused with Nazarene. So some people think that Jesus Christ was a Nazarite, but that just means a resident of Nazareth. We do not see an example of Jesus taking the Nazarite vow. However, Christ and Christians are spiritual Nazarites in a spiritual sense, and we're going to go through that. So some famous Nazarites were, I'm sure you can name them. I told some of the students, please don't raise your hand. Hold your questions to the end because they like to ask Mr. Musgrove difficult questions. Samson took the Nazarite vow. Samuel, Paul may have taken the Nazarite vow we see in Acts. And then, of course, John the Baptist took the Nazarite vow. So let's go through some of these conditions of the Nazarite vow and see how they apply to Christians, how they apply to us, our purpose in life. If you are in Numbers 6, we find our first one in verse 4. Well, let's read verse 3 and 4. It says, he shall separate himself from wine and similar drink. He shall drink neither vinegar made from wine, nor vinegar made from similar drink. Neither shall he drink any grape juice, nor eat any fresh grapes or raisins. All the days of this separation he shall eat nothing that is produced from the grapevine, from seed to skin. Now, it's easy to say, well, that just applies to wine. He shouldn't be a drunkard. That makes sense. All Christians should follow that, but it's a little bit stricter than that. It's everything from the vine, from seed to skin, from the grapes, from raisins. Why? Why would this condition be on the Nazarites? What sense would that make? Well, what do grapes symbolize? These things from the vine, and especially raisins. They symbolize abundance, indulgence. We see in other places talks about avoid the raisin cakes of the pagans. My question is always, what is a raisin cake? And it seems like it's pretty easily avoided. Doesn't sound that great. But it symbolized this excess. You avoid this excess. You don't look for this excess, even partaking of it. It's not bad or wrong to pursue the good things in life, but they shouldn't be our focus. So the point here is to pursue the things of God, not yourself. We are approaching Pentecost season, so the Pentecost and Passover, these were harvests. These are the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, and they were the essential harvest to survive. So bread at the time was called meat. It was the staple of the meal. And then you had the fall harvest. The fall harvest were the harvest of excess, the harvest of grapes and fruits. Those are great, but you had to have the first harvest first in order to survive the year. And so grapes are a symbol of indulgence. So if you were to take this vow, you're not called to an easy life. This is a warning that you're not going to go here and just eat grapes all the time. You're going to have struggles. Let's go to James 1. Save your place there in Numbers, if you will. So we will be back. James chapter 1, verses 12 through 18. It says here in verse 12, says, "Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then, when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. Of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of his creatures." If we were to fulfill this, we have to avoid those excesses, avoid putting anything between us and God, even delicious raisin cakes. Jumping back to Numbers, we see our second condition. Numbers in verse 5, number 6 in verse 5 says, all the days of the vow, his separation, all the days of the vow of his separation, no razor shall come upon his head until the days are fulfilled for which he separated himself to the Lord. He shall be holy. Then he shall let the locks of his head grow. Well, now this vow is kind of meddling, right? My hair is mine. Is he going to tell me how to grow my hair? Why would it matter what my hair looks like? I've devoted my entire life to you. He's going to tell me how to cut my hair. Well, this would eventually be the physical identification of a Nazarite. That's where we get some of the descriptions of the people's misconception of Jesus Christ being a Nazarite, because those that show his hair being exceedingly long, you would be able to identify a Nazarite because they wouldn't cut their hair. Their hair would grow long. And so how does this apply to us today? Are we not supposed to cut our hair? I'm failing at that miserably at the moment. Actually, if you're an ABC student, you've been told several times to get a haircut. Some of you. So how does this apply to us? Well, this is supposed to identify us as someone that is vowed to God. You're not going to look like you anymore. You're not going to look like a member of the world. We're going to be promised to be a different person than the world around us. So why would you want to look like the rest of the world? You're saying, I want to be different than I was before I made this vow. I'm going to change my hair. I'm going to change my thoughts. I'm going to change my heart to be that is of one directed to God. Let's go to Romans 12. Again, still saving your place there in Numbers. Just one verse here, verse 1 of Romans 12 says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. So it's no big deal. God tells you how to cut your hair. He tells you how to act and how to be, because you are a sacrifice to him. Everything you are, you owe to God. You've devoted your life to him. You are that living sacrifice. God created us. And then through sin, we threw it away. And what happened then? He redeemed us. And so you're going to give stipulations on how much you were willing to show that love, that devotion to God. He's asking the only reasonable thing of us, which is everything. The point is that we are trying to be transformed into the image of God. And so we should be identified for that. Hair, again, is symbolic of a covering. We're subject to the will of God. And so hair would become a symbol of the willingness to submit to God. Now, I'm not questioning anybody's hairstyle, obviously. This is spiritual now, that you spiritually submit to God everything. And so that is what's symbolic here. Don't turn there, but in the story of Elisha, there's an interesting story there. It's actually confusing. You read it without getting in the depths of Bible study. You're like, what on earth did I just read? About Elisha and the bear. You all know that story. So 40 youths, 40 young men, depending on what translation you have, started taunting Elisha. It's in 2 Kings 2:23. Don't turn there. I'm not going to turn there. I'm going to paraphrase it here. But he went there. He's heading to Bethel. And so these youths started mocking him, saying, "Go up, you old bald head. Go up, you old bald head." And then a bear comes and murders the youths. It seems a bit out of place. It seems harsh. Now, why? Why would that be in the Bible? What lesson is there? Where this youth making fun of Elisha's haircut was essentially noting that he was a man of God. However his hair was portrayed, it wasn't necessarily, we can see evidence that necessarily he wasn't bald, but he was a servant of God. It identified him as a servant of God. So what these youths, these young men, were essentially saying was, "Go away, you man of God. Go away, you man of God." And so his hair showed who he was, and God protected him. So that is how we should have the showing that we are. We are lights to the world. People should be able to look at us and tell that, hey, they're not of this world. They are light. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's look at James 4. A lot of places we could go. James 4 and verse 4 starts out pretty harsh at first. It says, "Adulterers and adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God?" And so if you don't follow God or look like somebody who's following God, you're following this way, you are an adulterer or an adulteress, ladies. Your friendship with the world is enmity with God. Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. So this haircut that it's talking about through this vow is symbolic of us separating ourselves. Our actions, our way of life should be holy, should be set apart, not just our haircut, our way of life spiritually. We are holy, we are set apart. Let's look at John 15. One more point on this. We read this at the Passover most time. John 15, verses 18 through 19. Said, "If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you." That kind of adds a point to staying away from those grapes, that life is going to be hard. We're set apart. The world is going to hate us for it. So what happens in order to avoid that? You're going to try to blend in with the world? You're trying to try to be a part of it? No, we're to be set apart from the world, and therefore we will look different. We will act different. We will be a different people. Jumping back to Numbers. Down in verse 6. It says, "All the days that he separates himself to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body. He shall not make himself unclean even for his father or his mother or his brother or his sister when they die, because his separation to God is on his head. All the days of his separation he shall be holy to the Lord." You can't go near a dead body if you took this vow. Not even if it's your father's dead body or your mother's or your brother's or a sister's. It sounds harsh. It's a lot to ask. What difference would that make? Why would God ask that of these Nazarites? Well, one, I'd like to point out that's very similar to that of a priest. Priests were to be holy. They would be separated, and while they were separated, they couldn't go near dead bodies. So when a Nazarite took the vow, they aspired to become holiness to God. They were asking God to make them holy for him so that he could do their best to do what he needed them to do. And so God would do his best. Don't turn there, but an interesting verse I like to think about when I think about this is Mark 12, verse 27. This is when Christ is answering the Sadducees. The Sadducees didn't believe in resurrection from the dead. That's why they were sad, you see. And he tells them that God is not the God of the dead. He's the God of the living. You, therefore, talking to the Sadducees, are greatly mistaken. So God is not the God of the dead. He's the God of the living. So he tells those that are vowed to him to stay away from death, to avoid that. Why? Well, following God, and this is what I get from that, from Mark 12, it's not meant to be a macabre existence. It's not supposed to be meaningless. We're not to be sitting in the corner, even though we can't eat raisin cakes. We're sitting in ashes and hitting ourselves on the back and beating ourselves up. God is the God of life, a life of endless possibilities, a focus on spiritual life. See, even back here in the Nazarite vow, this is symbolic of resurrection. We're focused on the resurrection. So those that are dead, they're dead. And they're looking forward to the resurrection. But those that are alive, that is what you're focused on. We're focused on life now and life in the future. So they were to stay away from dead things, which is exactly what you and I should be focused on. Now, I'm not telling you to avoid any funerals, but you're supposed to be focused on the Spirit. We're dedicated to God. We have this purpose, and that purpose is to be focused on spiritual things. Let's look at Romans 8. Romans 8, verses 5 through 6. Says, "For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace." So that is supposed to be us. We're not focused on dead things. We're focused on living, on the life, the promise of an inheritance that God gives us. That is our focus. We're to start concerning ourselves with the things of life. We're called to be holy, called to be spiritual, and called to produce those spiritual fruits. Back in Numbers, kind of the last aspect of the Nazarite vow we'll talk about is down in verse 9. Now, this is what happens if during your separation you accidentally, through no fault of your own, you're walking on a road and somebody dies next to you. Besides having to deal with that psychiatrically, you are to separate yourself again. So in verse 9 it says, "If anyone dies very suddenly beside him, and he defiles his consecrated head, he shall shave his head on the day of his cleansing. On the 7th day he shall shave it. Then on the 8th day he shall bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons to the priest to the door of the tabernacle of meeting. And the priest shall offer one as a sin offering, the other as a burnt offering, the other as to make atonement for him because he sinned in regard to the corpse, and he shall sanctify his head on that same day. He shall consecrate to the Lord the days of his separation and bring a male lamb of its first year as a trespass offering, but the former days shall be lost because his separation was defiled." So the clock starts over. The point here is sacrifice. That this separation, this vow, this purpose of God requires sacrifice. You see it described there. This runs the whole gamut of sacrifices. There's these offerings to God. The same that consecrated the priesthood. So you had to be reconsecrated. And so you and I are called to be sacrifices, we saw before. Now we don't, if we accidentally come in contact with a dead body, we don't have to reconsecrate ourselves because why? Jesus Christ. We'll see that pointed out in a minute. But the sacrifice here is you. You are the living sacrifice. And so, interesting here, continuing in verse 13, what happens at the end of the vow? So you dedicated so much amount of time, these years to God. You stayed away from dead bodies. You kept your hair long, didn't cut it. You didn't eat anything from the vine. What happens at the end of it? Verse 13 says, "Now this is the law of the Nazarite. When the days of his separation are fulfilled, he shall be brought to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and he shall present his offering to the Lord. One male lamb, again, describes the offering. One male lamb, and essentially, verse 15, a basket of unleavened bread." And so you separated yourself. You've given this section of your life to God, and now you have to make sacrifices at the end of it? Why? Seems a little bit over the top. Why would God ask for these sacrifices? You just devoted a portion of your life, your hair. You can't have the cool hairstyle anymore for a little while. Yourself to God. Why more sacrifices? Even after the vow, there had to be more sacrifices in order to understand how much God has done for us. We owe God a few things, as mentioned before, and that is everything. We are God's people. We didn't used to be, but we are now. We will be used to call people today and to work with God, or God will work through us in the day tomorrow. And so we do need a sacrifice. If you question that, Jesus Christ lived a perfect life. And what happened at the end of Christ's perfect life? There was a sacrifice. A sacrifice was required. Not because of Christ, but because of us. And so this was the lesson that the Nazarites were being taught, that a sacrifice at the end of this is still required. So God left us some examples. I could use any of these and put Samson here or Samuel. I'm just going to use one found in the story of a man who was called the greatest, and I found it kind of interesting. His name was John before his birth. Let's see, if you want to turn to Luke, we're done with Numbers. Look at now, I'm not going to read all about John the Baptist, but he had an interesting story, an interesting reason why he was a Nazarite. So John's parents, if you want to read here in Luke, I'm not going to read it. This is where we pick up the story. But John's parents were Zacharias, who worked in the temple. He was a temple priest, and his mother was Elizabeth. And they had accepted her. They were both up in age. I think whoever the author of Luke was, I find it interesting how he worded this, and that we men or authors should take example. In verse 18 says, Zacharias said to the angel, "How shall I know this? For I am old, and my wife is well advanced in years." She's not old, but she's well advanced. So in their age, they had accepted their fate to be childless. But we see while John, his order had been called up to serve in the temple, angel Gabriel came to him and promised him a son. That son's name would be John. And because John didn't believe, or Zacharias didn't believe, he was struck mute. And so if you think God doesn't have a sense of humor, it's not spelled out in the scriptures, but Zacharias finished his term in his order serving at the temple, and then being mute had to go find his beautiful, advanced in years bride, Elizabeth, and try to organize doing whatever a married couple has to do in order to have a son while being mute, which had to have been the most awkward game of charades you've ever seen. Not trying to be Kraus, but it's not spelled there. Somehow it worked out, and they gave birth to John. Now, John was led, his father worked in the temple, so that seemed like a meaningful life. I just joined my father. He would have been trained to be a temple priest just like his father, but instead he was led to avoid civilization, to ignore his birthright duty, to begin serving the temple. Instead, he lived in the desert. He lived in the wilderness until he was clearly told what to do. He simply refused to take upon himself something that was not ordained to be, or to move before God's time was right. There's a lesson there. He waited for God. He's continued in a state of perpetual preparation. He grew in the desert and became strong in the Spirit. If you look down in verse 80 of Luke 1, it says just that. It says, so the child grew and became strong in the Spirit, and he was in the desert to the day of his manifestation to Israel. So in God's infinite wisdom, he knew the perfect minute to call John to action. Somebody, perhaps Gabriel, returned to him in the desert and gave him instructions from the Almighty God. Now, it's notable that he didn't come up with his own doctrine. I mean, after all, his last name was the Baptist. And so he's like, hey, I think I should start baptizing people. No, that came from God. A messenger from God taught John to baptize with water for the remission of sins. And we see over in John 1 and verse 33, this was the culmination of what John had been waiting for. He said, I did not know, John 1 and verse 33 said, I did not know him, but he who sent me to baptize with water said to me, upon whom you see the Spirit descending and remaining on him, this is he who baptizes with the Holy Spirit. So when John was called to act, John's ministry became successful. His faith was rewarded when he fulfilled all righteousness by baptizing the Son of God. Now, I wanted to talk about John and his dedication to God and God's way of life, because I think it's very interesting what happens in John chapter 5. After John the Baptist passed away, he gets eulogized. Is that a word? He has his eulogy given by Jesus Christ himself. John chapter 5 and verse 33. Says in verse 33, you have sent to John, and he has borne witness to the truth. Yet I do not receive testimony from man, but I say these things that you may be saved. He was the burning and shining lamp, and you were willing for a time to rejoice in his light. That's what Jesus Christ said about John. Aren't we all waiting for Jesus Christ to say that about us? That we were burning and shining lamp, and that for a little while, for the time that is allotted to us, we give off a little bit of light, that people can rejoice. So that is ultimate greatness that we seek. Of course, can't go here without thinking about Matthew 5. Matthew 5, verses 13 through 16. Some of you probably have this memorized. It says, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, now how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. So those that devote their life to God, that find that purpose, they give flavor to the world. Why would you want to be a flavorless part of the world? Reading on, you are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So I'm wrapping up now, but I wanted to leave the class and everyone here with a little bit of something. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it, I've had to say a goodbye a lot lately. And so I've had a lot of times to think about parting words, and at least right now in my life, This is what I want to leave you all with. Leave the class 2025 class of ABC with these thoughts. Now, I don't know how much credit I could take for this. It comes from two of my favorite quotes. However, I just wanted them to rhyme. So now they rhyme in a little short poem. It's entitled, "Only Those Who Dare Brave the Deep Deserve the Peril." Ships are safest in the bay, where gentle waters bid them stay. Their hulls unscarred, their sails at rest, cradled where the waves caress. But that is not what ships are for, not built to idle on the shore. Their timbers yearn for salt and spray, for winds that call them far away. Only those that dare the deep, where tempests rage and shadows creep, deserve the peril, earn the fight, to chase the stars, to taste the night. For calm may keep a vessel whole, but never will it test the soul. So raise the anchor, face the tide, and let the inward parts decide. So to avoid ending a message with my own words, I want to say that change is hard. Change is scary. Change is uncomfortable. But when Peter knew that he was leaving this world behind, he was leaving the brethren, he knew that they would go through change, hard change, apostasy, false prophets. And he left them with this one final thought, and this is what I'll close with. He said that even though it is hard, even though you'll go through these things, and how I wish I could go through them with you, he said, remember to grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. To him be the glory both now and forever. Amen.